I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining me for this special Sunday evening edition of Dear Mr. Potter. And it's not just special because it's a Sunday, it's special because tonight we are discussing chapters 21 and 22 of The Prisoner of Azkaban. Tonight, we conclude our discussion of the book, and we see how so many of these subplots set in motion earlier in this novel dovetail together into what is, for me, the most rewarding and among the more ambitious climaxes that we'll get from J.K. Rowling in this entire series. I am Alistair Stevens. There's a lot of chat already going on here in the Crowdcast chat. A lot of people multitasking tonight, you guys. A lot of people also watching the World Series, and a lot of people carving jack-o'-lanterns, because the reason that we're having this early Sunday session is that Tuesday is Halloween. And I thought that it was impractical, infeasible, and just unjust to have you guys join me here on Tuesday night. So we get it early. We get it 2 days early here on Dear Mr. Potter, because that's how we do. If this reading tonight allows us to do anything, it allows us to travel freely in time. We're definitely going to be talking about Hermione's Time Turner. Of course, we're going to be talking about Hermione's Secret, the title of chapter 21, which is a huge and dense chapter. I don't think that J.K. Rowling has done anything this ambitious yet in the Harry Potter series. We're going to get a few chapters that are going to be something like as definitive as Hermione's Secret and the rest of the series, but this is a new high watermark, I would argue, for the series. And as I say, a rewarding conclusion to what has been, up until this point, a compelling and dense novel. There's just a lot to unpick as we move ahead, a lot to unpick as we address the mystery of the Time Turner, as we address Buckbeak's ultimate fate, as we address the ultimate fate of Sirius Black, the ultimate fate of Remus Lupin, the ultimate fate, I guess, of Harry and Ron and Hermione. But most importantly, we offer a couple of perspectives. Most importantly, I should say, for our discussions here in Dear Mr. Potter, we offer a couple of perspectives on crime and punishment here in the final chapters, which may not be what we expect. We are not going to get, in the pages of this book, the neat resolution that we have seen previously from Harry Potter novels. There is nothing like the tidy bow put on circumstances here at Hogwarts at the end of this novel, as we saw in Philosopher's Stone or in Chamber of Secrets, though the book itself doesn't seem to highlight that absence of a neat bow. It doesn't seem to highlight this odd structural incompletion that we'll see at the end of the novel. I think this is entirely purposeful. I think that the very end of this book is one of the reasons why I see Prisoner of Azkaban as the turning point in the series. We're going to be left with a very different world, and in some senses, a very different Harry than we had right at the beginning of the book, than we've seen in the two previous books. So more on that as we move through our discussion. We must move through our discussion with some rapidity tonight, because I have 13 slides for chapter 21. I've only pulled, I think, 3 or 4 slides for the very last chapter in the book, but Hermione's Secret is a Goliath of a chapter. So we're going to have to confront that head on and charge through and do all that we can do. We have Rayla Lynn here, and Erica, and Sosa Sundari is joining us, and Lindsay and Angela, and just, I may have said Angela twice there, but you know what? Angela deserves to be mentioned twice. We have C-Star, and Becca is here with us, and Bryce, and Kendall, and Karen. Guys, it is lovely to have you all here this evening for this, our final discussion of the novel Prisoner of Azkaban. Do stay tuned, though. Right at the end of tonight's session, I'll talk about our plans for discussing the movie and what amounts to an extra and somewhat unique live show. We'll talk about that when we get right to the end of tonight's session. But first, let's get into our discussion as we begin chapter 21, Hermione's Secret, with an off-screen discussion between one Cornelius Fudge and one Severus Snape. Shocking business, shocking miracle, none of them died. Never heard the like. By thunder, it was lucky you were there, Snape. Thank you, Minister. Order of Merlin, second class, I'd say first class if I can wangle it. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Nasty cut you've got there. Black's work, I suppose. As a matter of fact, it was Potter, Weasley, and Granger, Minister. No, Black had bewitched them. I saw it immediately. A confundus charm, to judge by their behavior. They seemed to think there was a possibility he was innocent. They weren't responsible for their actions. On the other hand, their interference might have permitted Black to escape. They obviously thought they were going to catch Black single-handed. They got away with a great deal before now. I'm afraid it's given them a rather high opinion of themselves. And of course, Potter has always been allowed an extraordinary amount of license by the headmaster. Ah, well, Snape, Harry Potter, you know, we've all got a bit of a blind spot where he's concerned. And yet, Is it good for him to be given so much special treatment? Personally, I try and treat him like any other student, and any other student would be suspended at the very least for leading his friends into such danger. Consider, Minister, against all school rules, after all the precautions put in place for his protection, out of bounds, at night, consorting with a werewolf and a murderer, and I have reason to believe he's been visiting Hogsmeade illegally, too. Well, we shall see, Snape, we shall see. The boy has undoubtedly been foolish. Melissa pointing out here in the chat, this is the longest Snape has spoken. Indeed, it is. This is also Snape in a new milieu. We have seen him consorting with the students, of course, where he favors terse, rather tyrannical and dictatorial proclamations. We've seen him talking with Dumbledore, where generally he's on the back foot because Dumbledore, well, knows Severus Snape and allows him very little license. But here, dealing with Cornelius Fudge, dealing with the man who is, by this point in the book, more like Severus Snape than we are comfortable admitting, I would say, Snape is in a very different mode. Also, of course, crucially, what is the big distinction between this Snape and all previous Snapes? This Snape is victorious. This Snape has won. This Snape is assured now of victory. He has had his moment of triumph over, yes, of course, Sirius Black, and yes, of course, Remus Lupin, and he has proved Dumbledore wrong in his trust of the aforementioned Professor Lupin, but much more importantly, here, Severus Snape has claimed some kind of victory over Harry Potter. And still, Snape is not giving us a perspective with which we should be, I think, at this point, entirely unsympathetic. He's making a fair point here. In fact, he's making a fair point so carefully, so painstakingly, so deftly, that we are compelled, even if we haven't already been reading this book with a certain amount of suspicion regarding Harry's behavior, regarding Harry's exceptionalism and his indulgence here at Hogwarts. If that has never occurred to you before this scene, I think we are primed by the way that Snape lays out his argument to look with a certain suspicion on Harry and on his role here at Hogwarts. They've got away with a great deal before now. I'm afraid it's given them a rather high opinion of themselves. And of course, Potter has always been allowed an extraordinary amount of license by the headmaster. Okay, so two things. They've gotten away with a lot. That is to say that they have not been trained to be suitably respectful of authority, despite the fact that we might argue that in the first two books, Snape excluded, our power trio actually displays a great deal of respect for authority. They're generally inclined to trust the authority figures at Hogwarts and not question them unduly. Certainly that's true even, I would argue, in the first half of this book. We don't necessarily treat the newcomer Remus Lupin with as much suspicion as we might, or I should say the power trio don't treat him with as much suspicion as we might because he seems affable. But we've been down that road before. And then we get the direct connection between Harry and Dumbledore. What is Snape angling for here? What is Snape trying to get here? Well, he's trying to drag Dumbledore down with Harry. If he can prove that Harry is untrustworthy, then he can also prove that Dumbledore is, at the very least, an ineffectual headmaster and may be more openly corrupt than we've acknowledged so far. And Cornelius Fudge, of course, responds in the way that the Minister of Magic would. The Minister of Magic, as a political appointee, would. Ah, Snape, Harry Potter, you know, we've all got a bit of a blind spot where he's concerned. By inference, Snape, he's the boy who lived. What do you think we're going to do? Treat him like Ron Weasley? Treat him like Draco Malfoy? Have you been doing that, Snape? Well, Snape tries to, of course. He claims that he does. He tries to make that argument, though, of course, we have seen many times over that while he is critical of all the students under his care, he does not treat them equally. And yet, is it good for him to be given so much special treatment? Personally, I try and treat him like any other student, and any other student would be suspended at the very least for leading his friends into such danger. Consider, Minister. Okay, so this is Snape making his case. Consider, Minister, against all school rules, what is the framework that Snape is handing Cornelius Fudge for the punishment, the inevitable and just punishment of Harry, parenthetically, and also Ron and Hermione, about whom Snape cares a great deal less? What is the framework that he's offering here? The rules of Hogwarts. He is still supporting this notion that Harry is a child, that he belongs in the the sub-legalistic or the kind of micro-legalistic world of Hogwarts as opposed to the super-legalistic or macro-legalistic world of wizarding culture in general. Consider, Minister, against all school rules, after all the precautions put in place for his protection, out of bounds at night, consorting with the werewolf and a murderer. No coincidence, of course, that Snape should list them in that order. A werewolf! Also a murderer, also a convicted murderer, also the greatest threat ever to break free of Azkaban. Yes, but most importantly, a werewolf. He's broken the school rules, Minister. Surely some punishment must be inevitable now. Because Harry, well, has Harry broken any laws in the wizarding world? Well, possibly. Possibly. We might be able to speculate that eluding the Dementors has actually been in contravention of at least the Ministry's intent, if not the Minister's outright rule. Maybe there isn't a law that says you shall not cross the path of the Dementors, that you shall not try to impede the Ministry in an investigation, in an active investigation. But certainly that is the sense that we get, particularly if we expand our understanding of the Ministry vis-a-vis the Dementors to include this idea that the Ministry is suppressing knowledge of the Expecto Patronum charm because the absence of that knowledge keeps the wizarding world in line. It's possible that Harry here can be at least under some kind of suspicion, at least under some kind of investigation in the context of the adult wizarding world, but that is not where Snape goes. Oh no, Snape wants his authority as a professor at Hogwarts to be paramount. He has broken school rules after all the precautions put in place for his protection, rules that were established to keep Harry safe, which is one of the ways in which I think we're supposed to question Harry's actions here. He was out of bounds at night, consorting with a werewolf and a murderer. Well, there probably aren't school rules, actually, Severus, about consorting with a werewolf and a murderer. I mean, it's possible that there are somewhere in the labyrinth and codexes, which presumably include all of the rules that have been made for very specific situations at Hogwarts, but he was out of bounds at night. And I have reason to believe he has been visiting Hogsmeade illegally too. Wait, he was going on a field trip without permission? What rank criminality is this, Severus Snape? Severus here leaning on the legalism of Hogwarts to convict Harry of his juvenile crimes is opening a door to some discussions that we're going to have actually about justice and about crime and punishment later in this chapter. Kendall says here, I'd assume he's trying to get Fudge on his side to back him up with Dumbledore that he should be punished, that Dumbledore presumably should be punished too, right? Yes, Harry has broken the rules, but he has been allowed to break the rules. This is why we're making our case against Harry. And as I say, we don't really have time to go into this too much, but we've been talking about Harry's exceptionalism since the beginning of the first book. Harry is given an incredible amount of freedom, certainly an unequal amount of freedom. Harry is allowed to do things, permitted to do things, encouraged to do things that the other kids are not allowed to do. Harry is exceptional. That is recognized by certain agents within Hogwarts as a school, including Severus Snape. The reason that Snape comes down so hard on Harry is that he recognizes Harry's unique status. He recognizes Harry's uniquity here. We're going to continue talking about that. Yes. Good. Oh no, Becca's having a little trouble keeping up. I'm so sorry, Becca. Technical troubles are the worst. I empathize, and I hope that you enjoy the podcast after the fact. Yes. Yes. Oh, Gildarts is quoting here for us. Section 59.8 in section B, subsection A of the school rules state that the scarred boy must never consort with with werewolves nor murderers. Yes. Yes. Good. As Troitel says here in the chat, given Quidditch rules, there probably are school rules about consorting with werewolves. Hey, you know what? Maybe this perhaps isn't the first time. Yes. Yes, exactly. Dumbledore points out that Fudge has already bent the rules for Harry after the aunt problem. Yes, back at the beginning of the book, presumably the Ministry itself paid for Harry's residence in Diagon Alley after the unfortunate incident at the Dursleys. Is that something that the Ministry would do for every child? I mean, presumably not, right? Presumably Harry is getting special dispensation. And of course, we understand now that that special dispensation was in part to protect Harry. But would the Ministry step in even to protect a child? Well, not the Ministry that we're going to see later in the series, certainly. We're opening up questions here about the Ministry's role, about Dumbledore's role, about Harry's role. We're basically questioning the entire foundation of the Harry Potter series of novels as we understand it to date. and we're not going to resolve those questions. We're not going to satisfactorily answer those questions, or at least we're not going to logically and rationally restore our world here to the expected status quo. We're not going to get a happy ever after tied up with a bow ending to this book. We're going to get something far darker, far more transitional, a post-liminal Harry Potter here. Let's see, as we push on. Good. Yes, James, Sirius, and Peter were all consorting with a werewolf back in the day, says C-Star. Yes, but we don't know that, do we? Or at least, no, wait, we know that. I'm asking, does the Institute Hogwarts know that? Do they know that to the degree that they would enact school rules to prevent that? Possibly, possibly. Who knows what lurks in Dumbledore's mind? Yes. Exactly. Rayla Lynn asks, where has this freedom come from? Why has he been allowed to do all the things he has done? Is it his celebrity curiosity about what would happen? Well, this is the question. What is it that makes Harry special? Is it his celebrity? Is it just because he is the boy who lived? Is it that he is specifically the boy who lived, parenthetically, and was instrumental in the downfall of Voldemort? Possibly, possibly. Is it a kind of fear? Is it a kind of association between Harry and Voldemort that we recognize simple exceptionalism? Or is there, contained within the framework of Harry Potter, contained within the framework of the series, simply an understanding from the adults that Harry is exceptional, that there is something special about him? Well, we'll be able to address that a little more directly as we move through the series, but yes, yes, good. Let's push on to our next slide here as I try and rearrange my notes so that I can see exactly what is happening, because it is time for Madame Pomfrey to come along and for Harry to show some resistance here. Madame Pomfrey now came walking briskly up the dark ward to Harry's bed. He turned to look at her. She was carrying the largest block of chocolate he had ever seen in his life. It looked like a small boulder. You're awake, she said briskly. She placed the chocolate on Harry's bedside table and began breaking it apart with a small hammer. How's Ron? Said Harry and Hermione together. He'll live, said Madame Pomfrey grimly. As for you two, you'll be staying here until I'm satisfied you're... Potter, what do you think you're doing? Harry was sitting up, putting his glasses back on and picking up his wand. I need to see the headmaster, he said. Potter, said Madame Pomfrey soothingly. It's all right. They've got Black. He's locked away upstairs. The Dementors will be performing the kiss any moment now. What? Harry jumped up out of bed. Hermione had done the same, but his shout had been heard in the corridor outside. Next second, Cornelius, Fudge, and Snape had entered the ward. Harry, what's this? Said Fudge, looking agitated. You should be in bed. Has he had any chocolate? He asked Madame Pomfrey anxiously. Minister, listen, Harry said. Sirius Black's innocent. Peter Pettigrew faked his own death. We saw him tonight. You can't let the Dementors do that thing to Sirius. But Fudge was shaking his head with a small smile on his face. Harry, you're very confused. You've been through a dreadful ordeal. Lie back down now. We've got everything under control. You haven't, Harry yelled. You've got the wrong man. I do love Madame Pomfrey's giant boulder of chocolate. Presumably this is the, I don't know, medicinal quantity in which chocolate comes. Yeah, just drop off a boulder of chocolate to the infirmary. We're going to need it sooner or later, particularly with all these Dementors kicking around. But, you know, just carving chunks off of a block of chocolate is kind of charmingly institutional. I rather like the medical aspect of that more than I like the, you know, homely comfort of unwrapping a small piece of chocolate, as we did with Professor Lupin, you know. No, this is much more forceful than that. Here, I have my boulder of chocolate. Let's just knock off a chunk and just chew on this. Just gnaw on this for a while, Harry. You'll feel much better. It's pretty powerful. But here we see Harry being driven still by this impulse, still by this desire to do justice. He's lost. I mean, he has lost. He has endured the reveal of Sirius Black, the reveal of Remus Lupin, the reveal of Peter Pettigrew. He has endured all that passed in the Shrieking Shack, then the transformation of Remus Lupin into his werewolf form. And a mention of that here, you'll note, is Harry still protecting his Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher from further suspicion? Does he want to avoid spreading that news any further than he absolutely has to? He then faced the Dementors by the side of the frozen lake and lost. But still he wants to fight. Still he wants to push on. And what is his plan? What is his response to all of this adversity? He wants to see the headmaster. He wants to appeal to exactly the juvenile legalistic structures that Snape was just invoking. For a second here, we're still in the juvenile story. It's all going to be okay. Dumbledore will fix it. Dumbledore has the authority to fix it. Well, we'll see how that works out. Angela asks the possibly rhetorical question, but I want to delve into this a little bit. Does Fudge like fudge? I'd imagine not, right? I'd imagine that his time at Hogwarts would have been nothing but a parade of fudge delivery. It would have just been, fudge-related pranks. Oh, suddenly his locker is full of fudge. Suddenly his robes are just, replete with fudge in every available pocket. He learned the, summon fudge cantrip and had that cast at him frequently. Yeah, I have no idea. Yes, it's entirely possible. Yes. Oh, exactly. As Jamie says, this isn't Hershey or even Cadbury chocolate. This is the real stuff. If by real stuff you mean terrible industrial waxy chocolate, yes, I'm sure that it is. Yes, this is what happens when you melt down Easter eggs. I'm sure this is probably not the greatest chocolate, but it's good enough to get the job done, I'm sure. So we summon Professor Dumbledore. We make this appeal to authority, and Dumbledore has a thing or two to say. Because Dumbledore, surprising no one, has the answer. Surprising most everyone, I'm sure. That answer can be found by breaking the school rules. Dumbledore held up his hand to stem the flood of interruptions. "It is your turn to listen, and I beg you will not interrupt me because it is very little time," he said quietly. "There is not a shred of proof to support Black's story except your word, and the word of two 13-year-old wizards will not convince anybody. A street full of eyewitnesses swore they saw Sirius murder Pettigrew. I myself gave evidence to the ministry that Sirius had been the Potter's secret keeper." "Professor Lupin can tell you," Harry said, unable to stop himself. "Professor Lupin is currently deep in the forest, unable to tell anyone anything. By the time he is human again, it will be too late. Sirius will be worse than dead. I might add that werewolves are so mistrusted by most of our kind that his support will count for very little, and the fact that he and Sirius are old friends. But listen to me, Harry. It is too late. You understand me? You must see that Professor Snape's version of events is far more convincing than yours." "He hates Sirius," Hermione said desperately. "All because of some stupid trick Sirius played on him." "Sirius has not acted like an innocent man. The attack on the fat lady, entering Gryffindor Tower with a knife without Pettigrew alive or dead. We have no chance of overturning Sirius's sentence." "But you believe us." "Yes, I do," said Dumbledore quietly. "But I have no power to make other men see the truth or to overrule the Minister of Magic." Harry stared up into the grave face and felt as though the ground beneath him were falling sharply away. He had grown used to the idea that Dumbledore could solve anything. He had expected Dumbledore to pull some amazing solution out of the air, but no, their last hope was gone. "What we need," said Dumbledore slowly, and his light blue eyes moved from Harry to Hermione, "is more time." "But," Hermione began, and then her eyes became very round. "Oh!" There is a risk whenever you enter into a kind of deep textual analysis of any given book that you can construct an argument that is not in line with the book's intent. That is to say that you can create a logical and a rational scaffolding surrounding the text, and you can point to individual references, and you can point to individual moments of clear intent, and you can speculate, you can extrapolate from those moments and build out a theorem about the book's underlying intent. What does the author mean to accomplish? What does the story mean to accomplish? And there's always a risk that you can, with sufficient rationality, with sufficient command of logic, and with enough time on your hands, you can build an argument to convince pretty much anyone of pretty much anything. That's one of the joys of this kind of interpretive analysis, this kind of close reading of a text. But sometimes it can be enormously rewarding to see a book offer a firm foundation, exactly where you need there to be a firm foundation in order to support this scaffolding of speculation. And in this paragraph, in this excerpt, I should say, J.K. Rowling gives us exactly one of those firm foundations. This beat about Harry stared up into the grave face and felt as though the ground beneath him were falling sharply away. He had grown used to the idea that Dumbledore could solve anything. He had expected Dumbledore to pull some amazing solution out of thin air, but no, their last hope was gone. Exactly as we've said, Harry turns to Dumbledore because Dumbledore can fix it, because there is here an injustice, and Professor Dumbledore is the ultimate authority within the bounds of Hogwarts. Not greater than Cornelius Fudge, perhaps, in the broader wizarding world, but equally great here within the walls of Hogwarts. But not this time. This time, well, Dumbledore can offer a solution. Dumbledore can point to a potential path, can point to one great last hope of turning things well, if not, if not righting the ship completely, at least righting it a little bit, at least making things more just than they are now. Even if we can't actually aspire to absolute justice, which we can't because we don't have Peter Pettigrew and we don't have the word of Remus Lupin, who is off now in the forest somewhere dealing with his werewolf state, and we have this innate distrust of werewolves by wizards. Justice is beyond our reach now, but we can move toward justice. But we can only do so by breaking not just school rules, but breaking kind of the tiers of agency that we get here. Dumbledore cannot intervene. He can nudge. But our heroes here have to save the day themselves. And it's interesting that this defaults to Hermione. There's an excellent question, actually. Let me call this up so I can read it exactly. This question comes to us from Joseph, who says, there's a symmetry here with the closing movement of book 2. We're now working with Harry and Hermione rather than Harry and Ron while the third member is incapacitated. However, in book 2, we're still reliant on Hermione's aid while Ron contributes little. Here, Hermione is again critical, whereas Ron provides nothing. It puts into stark relief just how much more competent Hermione is. What is served by having such a contrast in their practical utility to Harry? This is an excellent question, right? And we should kind of expand our frame here a little bit to remember back to the end of Philosopher's Stone, where Ron is incapacitated too. You know, Harry is stripped of his friends as he moves through the trials toward the confrontation with Professor Quirrell at the end of the first book. And then in the second book, of course, Hermione is removed not just from the climax, but really from the third act of the story. She is... this is a provocative way of phrasing this, perhaps, and I certainly don't mean to cast any doubt on J.K. Rowling's intent here. But Hermione is incapacitated. Hermione is damseled a little bit in the second book in order to better motivate Harry. She becomes a victim of the basilisk and therefore isn't directly available to resolve the issue, even though, as Joseph points out in his question, Hermione is more critical to the resolution of that plot than Ron is. What are we to make of the difference between Hermione and Ron and their roles in these plots? Well, I should say, to kind of bracket that discussion, obviously, Hermione is going to be absolutely vital in the resolution of this conflict, in the resolution of Prisoner of Azkaban here, because she has had this separate storyline running all the way through the book. I don't necessarily think that we can say that, narratively speaking, Hermione is vital and Ron is not, because Ron's subplot with Scabbers has also been vital. Not vital in the movement of this plot specifically, but in the broader picture. Ron has been just as important to what the story of Harry Potter will be in due course than Hermione within the pages of this book. But Hermione clearly offers more applicable skill here. She's clearly of more material function to Harry, to the ongoing progression of the narrative at this point. Now, why is that? Is that just because Hermione is better and cooler and more awesome than Ron? Well, no, I don't think so. I think that Ron's virtues, being the Hufflepuff virtues, are simply less geared toward problem solving. They're less geared toward advancing the plot. Hufflepuffs, left to their own devices, would rarely solve a problem, I think. They would hang out and get along and build a great community and build a great culture. And that is partly Ron's role in the power trio. He mediates between Harry and Hermione. That's been challenged a little bit, but also in due course highlighted a little bit in the course of this book. He kind of intermediates between Harry and Hermione, and it is the conflict between Ron and Hermione that deprives Harry of his greatest assistance here. So yes, Ravenclaws, Hermione, of course, being our surrogate Ravenclaw here, Ravenclaws are going to solve problems. They're going to sit around all day just solving problems. And the world can turn to rack and ruin, and it doesn't matter because, hey, there's a puzzle to be solved. There's a riddle to be decrypted here. Hermione solves problems and Ron doesn't, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Ron is of less value. We're putting less emphasis, weirdly, in the pages of this book. We're putting less emphasis on one of the primary themes of Harry Potter as a series, which is, I mean, family, right? It's family in the broadest possible sense. It's family incorporating actual family and close family and kind of family by proxy and family by adoption, and then friends and found family. Family, the connections that we forge with those around us, those are absolutely core to the thematic impulse, the thematic motivation of this series as a whole. And Ron is fundamental to that. Ron, and by extension the other Weasleys, are fundamental to that. So is Ron less helpful? Yeah, I mean, when you're facing a riddle, when you're facing a challenge, when you're facing an obstacle that has to be overcome, yes, honestly, Ron is maybe a little less helpful than Hermione. But when you're building a community, when you're building the necessary relationships that will allow you to solve those problems, Ron is absolutely vital. So I think that when we consider Ron to be inessential, we consider Ron to be useless, or when Ron is sidelined toward the climax of the story, as he is here, which absolutely is, I think, a conscious parallel back to Chamber of Secrets, right? We incapacitate Hermione. She's in the infirmary. There's nothing more that she can contribute, and Harry and Ron push forward and do their thing. We're absolutely mirroring that here, and we're getting to explore another side of that power trio dynamic here, another kind of texture almost that's associated with our power trio. But it's not fair, I think, to consider Ron useless, or to consider his contribution any less valuable than Hermione's. It's a very different kind of contribution, but life is not a series of challenges to be overcome. Like, life is not a simple, flat, obvious obstacles and puzzles to be overcome. But it is vital, I think, that I do think that there is something to the idea that Ron's assistance in Chamber of Secrets is peripheral, and Hermione still manages to contribute significantly to the final resolving of that plot. Here, Ron's significance just as peripheral, arguably, even more peripheral, arguably, and Hermione's contribution far more significant, yes, but in part, I think that's a consequence of J.K. Rowling's increasing skill, particularly when it comes to the manipulation and alignment of her subplots. We've talked about this throughout our reading of Prisoner of Azkaban. The subplots within Prisoner of Azkaban are so much more functional. They express so much more narrative utility within the frame of the novel as a whole than they did in Chamber of Secrets or Philosopher's Stone. And that is going to continue, though arguably we're never actually going to hit this height again. Arguably, this is about as tight as it gets. And that's fine, because this is unusually tight. These are unusually well-aligned subplots. Even the incorporation of the Buckbeak subplot here in our climax is really very well plotted indeed. So from that perspective, I would be a little more kind to Ron. But yes, I think observing that reflective symmetry, I think, is important. And certainly considering the ways in which Ron and Hermione separately assist Harry, and then the ways in which the power trio works as a complete trio, I think that does unlock a greater understanding of what Harry is doing and how the power trio works as they move through these stories. Gosh, I must continue moving forward. Let's see here as we move on to our next slide. So this is the reveal, of course, of the Time Turner subplot. Now Hermione has figured it out. I just realized that the chat has stopped scrolling, and there's so much that you guys have said. Yes, as Rohit says, Harry takes action, Hermione solves problems, Ron brings them together. Yes. Jamie says, vitally, crucially, yes. Ron is also the first person to give Harry a home and a family. Who knows what Harry would have been without Ron? Maybe he would have been sucked in by Draco and then placed in Slytherin. You know, the more I think about that, the more I think about the positive influence of Ron on Harry's life, the more I think about that first scene where we meet Draco Malfoy back in Philosopher's Stone, where Draco comes in and he's being chummy with Harry, right? He wants Harry on his side. And if Harry hadn't previously met Ron, and if Draco hadn't opened up by being quite so awful to a Weasley, maybe Harry's life would have been different. Just by changing that one event, maybe Harry's life would have taken a different turn. As it is, of course, Ron manages to humanize Harry right from the jump, and does so beautifully. And you're right, of course, the influence of the Weasleys on Harry cannot be exaggerated, particularly here at the end of the third book, because now we're going to look ahead to a summer holidays spent with the Quidditch World Cup, and that is going to have a start. That is going to effect a stark change in Harry's life and fortune and outlook as we move into the fourth book. Yeah. Yes. Good. Okay. Let's push on. Yes, we've got to do our Time Turner bit here. Hermione turned the hourglass over 3 times. The dark ward dissolved. Harry had the sensation that he was flying very fast backward. A blur of colors and shapes rushed past him. His ears were pounding. He tried to yell but couldn't hear his own voice. And then he felt solid ground beneath his feet and everything came into focus again. He was standing next to Hermione in the deserted entrance hall and a stream of golden sunlight was falling across the paved floor from the open front doors. He looked wildly around at Hermione, the chain of the hourglass cutting into his neck. Hermione, what? In here! Hermione seized Harry's arm and dragged him across the hall to the door of a broom closet. She opened it, pushed him inside among the buckets and mops, then slammed the door behind them. What? Hermione, what happened? We've gone back in time, Hermione whispered, lifting the chain off Harry's neck in the darkness. 3 hours back. Harry found his own leg and gave it a very hard pinch. It hurt a lot, which seemed to rule out the possibility that he was having a very bizarre dream. There is a bit of inconsequential world-building detail here, of which I am very fond indeed. Why is there a janitorial closet full of buckets and mops at Hogwarts? It's Hogwarts. It's a magic school. Shouldn't they be able to clean it with magic? Shouldn't we have a little Fantasia sequence where wizards are manipulating mops to go off and clean the castle grounds by themselves? Isn't that how a wizard school should work? Well, maybe other wizarding schools do, if indeed there are other wizarding schools in the world. We've had no word of those, but perhaps there are, and perhaps we'll get to know them a little better someday. But not at Hogwarts. Why not at Hogwarts? Because Filch is a squib. Because Filch cannot manipulate magic in the way that he ought to be able to manipulate magic. So a janitorial closet stuffed with actual mundane, possibly even muggle cleaning supplies makes a lot of sense for Hogwarts. I like it very much. It was a beat that, it's one of those delightful beats that J.K. Rowling gives you where you go, hey, wait. Oh no, that's excellent. That makes a lot of sense. And that response to J.K. Rowling's world building is one of my favorite responses to J.K. Rowling's world building. But much more importantly, now we're dealing with the time turner. And while Harry has yet to catch up, I think that the astute reader here immediately thinks back through the events of the book. Oh, of course, this is what Hermione has been doing. This is why Hermione has been able to take at least double the regular load of classes. This is why Hermione is able to be literally in 2 places at once to take her exams. This makes now, well, just so much sense, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Well, time travel is a problem, you guys. Time travel is a problem. And there are some irreducible problems here, irresolvable problems here with the depiction of time travel within the pages of Prisoner of Azkaban. And to a degree, we can throw our hands up and say, well, magic did it. But we simultaneously have to reconcile the idea that Harry and Hermione have not yet traveled back in time, that this is their first time through the loop. That is to say that when we previously experienced the events that we are about to experience, Harry and Hermione were not temporarily displaced in attendance. But then we're going to get to the Frozen Lake side, where Harry has already seen himself. So we know that they were, in fact, in attendance. Is a particularly powerful spell sufficient to kind of bleed out through the timeline? This is the problem with time travel. Once you invoke time travel, you have to assert your rules either very carefully or not at all. You have to take one of these 2 approaches. It has to be rigorous and watertight, or it has to be so fluid that the reader can draw their own conclusions. And we really, as much as I would love to, you guys, and if you've stuck with me through my discussions of previous titles here at Point North Media, you'll know how much I love this stuff, how much I love a good time travel discussion. We just don't have time to get into the mechanics of time travel here. Perhaps we'll talk a little more about that when we get to the movie discussion. Yes, it's possible. Let me see here. Gildarts Winter says Harry should already have lost his soul. Perhaps, right? This is all part of the problem. If Harry and Hermione haven't yet traveled back in time, then there was no Patronus on the other side of the lake to drive away the Dementors and allow Harry to be rescued. That's our first time theory, right? That's our kind of open time loop theory, where Harry and Hermione have not, the first time through that sequence of events, Harry and Hermione were not, as I say, displaced in time, but in attendance. But if that's the case, then there was nothing to stop the Dementors, and Harry would have been presumably kissed. Pretty bad. So obviously that hasn't happened, and yet here we are now about to apparently move through these things for the first time. Yeah, Marauder's Map issues, says Joseph. Yeah, the Marauder's Map, equally problematic from a narrative perspective. Yes, we've talked before about how come Harry didn't notice Peter Pettigrew on the map before he did. I mean, yeah, there's a lot. Good. Angela says, it's hard to recapture the first time you read the book and don't know about the time turner. This is the point, right? Is that we can talk a great deal about the mechanics of this particular subplot and how things play out, but emotionally, it works. Emotionally, it is enormously propulsive. Emotionally, the simultaneous resolution of Hermione's outstanding subplot, the offering of an unexpected solution to the mystery of Hermione's, workload through the school year and all the little hints that we've dropped in that regard, the simultaneous resolution to that mystery and then invocation of that same technique, that same kind of narrative twist in order to drive us into the climax, to give Harry and parenthetically the reader hope. This is actually really strong writing. So we might nitpick around the fringes of the time turner, but as a core concept, I think it works beautifully. I do know that there are some readers who just hate the time turner because they hate time travel stories. Just in principle, time travel is, in the hands of some authors, a very easy loophole device. You can undo anything with the aid of time travel, and it does take a skilled and disciplined author to properly utilize time travel as a plot. I think J.K. Rowling hits more than she misses, is pretty much where I come down with this. Yeah. So Sundare says, interesting that time travel and divination arise in the same book. Yes, isn't it? In both senses, we're kind of radically expanding our notion of what is possible within this space. Yeah, good. C-Star points out, the first time through the sequence, Harry heard a final two people run through the hall and the door slam, himself and Hermione. Yeah, it's clear that it has happened before, but if it has happened before, we're left with some difficult questions to answer, particularly when we expand this out to include Hermione through the rest of the school year. It's tricky. Okay. Yes, good. Robin questions exactly that. When they're going down to Hagrid's the first time, the last thing they hear is the last pair of people hurrying across the hall and the door slamming. Is that not Harry and Hermione? Yes, it is. It absolutely is. Yes, good. Okay, let's keep moving on because we have to then get a description of the time turner. Hermione sat down on an upturned bucket looking desperately anxious, but Harry wanted a few questions answered. Where did you get that hourglass thing? It's called a time turner, Hermione whispered, and I got it from Professor McGonagall on our first day back. I've been using it all year to get to all my lessons. Professor McGonagall made me swear I wouldn't tell anyone. She had to write all sorts of letters to the Ministry of Magic so I could have one. She had to tell them that I was a model student and that I'd never, ever use it for anything except my studies. I've been turning it back so I could do hours over again. And that's how I've been doing several lessons at once, see? But Harry, I don't understand what Dumbledore wants us to do. Why did he tell us to go back 3 hours? How's that going to help Sirius? Harry stared at her shadowy face. There must be something that happened around now that he wants us to change, he said slowly. What happened? We were walking down to Hagrid's 3 hours ago. This is 3 hours ago, and we are walking down to Hagrid, said Hermione. We just heard ourselves leaving. Harry frowned. He felt as though he were screwing up his whole brain in concentration. Dumbledore just said we could save more than one innocent life. And then it hit him. Hermione, we're going to save Buckbeak. But how will that help Sirius? Dumbledore said he just told us where the window is, the window of Flitwick's office, where they've got Sirius locked up. We've got to fly Buckbeak up to the window and rescue Sirius. Sirius can escape on Buckbeak. They can escape together. From what Harry could see of Hermione's face, she looked terrified. If we manage that without being seen, it'll be a miracle. But we've got to try, haven't we? Said Harry. He stood up and pressed his ear against the door. The nature here of assistance and heroism, the nature here of the Ravenclaw rationality, the Ravenclaw tool here to solve the problem, and the Gryffindor/Slytherin impulse to actually solve the problem. Here, Hermione has everything that we need. She's already done everything that we need to solve the problem, but she doesn't know what to do. She doesn't know how to, take action. Taking action, luckily, is Harry Potter's specialty. It's Harry Potter's raison d'etre. It's the reason that Harry Potter is Harry Potter. He is the driving force behind the power trio, and he's going to take action now. That's so beautifully contrasted here. There must be something that happened around now. He wants us to change. He said slowly, what happened? We were walking down to Hagrid's 3 hours ago. This is Harry's impulse to take action. So let's talk about the time turner a little more. Hermione gets the time turner from Professor McGonagall after Professor McGonagall has dealt with the ministry, has persuaded the ministry to allow this child, this third-year student at Hogwarts, what is apparently rare and, relatively unlicensed, uncontrolled magic. She gives Hermione the time turner. Why? So that Hermione can double up on her studies. because Professor McGonagall clearly recognizes that Hermione has a great deal of academic potential, to the degree that Hermione is not bound by aptitude or intellect or dedication. No, Hermione is such a good student that she is bound by the constraints of linear time. That is astonishing. That is particularly astonishing in a school where there's a whole house dedicated to the smartest kids. Do the Ravenclaw kids have time turners? Probably not. The reason, perhaps, that the Ravenclaw kids don't have time turners and Hermione does, well, two reasons. One, the Ravenclaw kids also don't have Minerva McGonagall going to bat for them. Two, the Ravenclaw kids, because they are just Ravenclaw and not this Ravenclaw-Gryffindor hybrid that we've discussed, associated with Hermione throughout the series, because they aren't this combination of intellect and heroism, perhaps the Ravenclaw kids couldn't be trusted to use the time turner in quite the same way. I know that is an outright assault on the character of good Ravenclaw kids. I myself both self-identify and have been sorted several times into Ravenclaw, which should surprise no one. That is why there is a Ravenclaw glass sitting behind me on the shelf as I give this live session. But, I think that would a Ravenclaw student exercise the same kind of restraint as Hermione? Would any other student exercise the same kind of restraint as Hermione? Arguably not. But the sanctioning of Hermione's time turner is odd. It's weird. Why? Because, okay, it's not just the giving of the time turner, right? There are so many steps here where you have to kind of follow the logic in order for this subplot to make sense, that kind of challenge our understanding of what Hogwarts is. But crucially, I think, purposefully, deliberately challenge our understanding of what Hogwarts is. Is Hogwarts an incredibly well-ordered school where the rules apply to everyone and all the students are treated the same? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? No. We've been pushing back against that assertion from, well, at least the first potions class back in Philosopher's Stone. We get the outright, benevolent tyranny of Dumbledore right at the end of the first book, and the awarding of so many bonus points to Gryffindor so that they can take the House Cup. We talked at the time about how weird and quasi-unjust that is. Like, okay, is that really fair to all the kids at Hogwarts? No, because it turns out that Hogwarts isn't actually that interested in being fair to its students. It isn't actually that interested in having this kind of egalitarian, scholarly community. At Hogwarts, the teachers are allowed to take some kind of autonomous action here. Minerva McGonagall has done it before by encouraging the gift of the Nimbus 2000 to Harry back in the first book, and the awarding of the extra points in the first book, and now the awarding of the time turner. And all of this leads us to question the role of Hogwarts. We have been completely bound by the boarding school structures, right, of this juvenile story. In the frame of the boarding school story, Hogwarts is the whole world, and the school rules are as inviolate as any law you care to name, and the professors are the ultimate repositories of authority. That's not true now. That's just clearly untrue. And we know that that's untrue, even if you buy this entire chain of events, right? Minerva McGonagall apparently spontaneously decides, because Hermione gets the, I got it from Professor McGonagall on our first day back, right? First day of term, Hermione gets her time turner. But also, Minerva McGonagall has been in correspondence with the Ministry in order to give Hermione the time turner. So at some point over the summer vacation, McGonagall gets it into her head that actually, that wee Hermione could use a time turner. That would be great if she could go to all the classes and age 2 years in the span of a single year. That seems like a perfectly responsible approach. So she gets in touch with the Ministry, somehow manages to convince the Ministry that this rare and relatively unlicensed magic should be put into the hands of a third-year student at Hogwarts. No, it's going to be fine. I promise. I pinky swear, you guys, she's not going to use it for anything else. After all, it's not like Hermione is routinely caught up in grand adventures at Hogwarts, right? Right? So she gives Hermione the time turner, and Hermione uses the time turner, and that's all fine. But let's take it one step further here. The time turner has to be kept secret. Do the other professors know that Hermione has this? Well, by extension, Snape clearly doesn't, right? I think Professor Lupin clearly doesn't. It is very possible that McGonagall was the only professor who knew. It seems to me that Dumbledore figured it out more than authorized it in the first place. That's why he's being so coy. That's why he's being so, fey with his suggestion that they use the Time Turner to solve the climax of this novel. What does this tell us about Hogwarts, ultimately? It's another piece of evidence. It's another line of argument here that tells us that Hogwarts is not a school in the traditional sense. It is more like an academy, I suppose. Hogwarts doesn't care about kids like Neville Longbottom. Hogwarts, as an institution, doesn't care about unexceptional wizards. Yes, okay, fine. Yes, Hogwarts will make sure that you have a basic education in the magical arts, and we're going to preserve the facade. So we're going to preserve the facade that we're a wizarding school, and we're going to give you enough of an education that that facade can be preserved. But really, though, we're going to recognize exceptionalism. At least within Gryffindor, we're going to recognize exceptionalism, and we are going to break whatever rules we feel like in order to reward that exceptionalism. This is distinct to, and gosh, I've already spent so much time talking about this and I'm going to have to move on, but the giving of the Time Turner is distinct to, in that this is the first time that Hermione has been recognized as an agent within this world, as a force of action within this world, right? Giving gifts to Harry, giving Harry special treatment, absolutely. That's now so codified in the pages of Harry Potter that Snape is calling it out. Snape is lampshading it at the beginning of this week's reading. But Hermione, well, the power trio now carries its own weight. And Minerva McGonagall wants to, again, I don't want to be too critical of McGonagall's actions here. Yes, Hermione is an exceptional student, and yes, she has kept to her promise to use the Time Turner only for academic purposes. But the entire framework of this subplot encourages us, demands, in fact, that we question what Hogwarts is. And if that happened in a vacuum, then it might be shaky writing, right? If it happened without any other perspective on Hogwarts as an institution, then we might be encouraged to dismiss it and say, yeah, well, we just really wanted this time travel subplot and this is how we got there. But J.K. Rowling could have given us better support here. And of course, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? So it's always difficult when you look at a book and say, well, no, this is clearly intentional, because otherwise the author could just have done this thing and then it would have been perfect. That's a treacherous road. That's a road that you don't want to go down unless you're absolutely compelled to. But I do think that dispensing with the Time Turner in such a trivial fashion does encourage us to question these strictures here. Let's look here. You guys, there are thousands of words in the Crowdcast chat tonight. I'm so grateful. I do, by the way, go back and scroll through all of this stuff afterward, and I know that many of you will email me after the fact with further thoughts and observations, and I'm always grateful for that. You can contribute here. You can contribute on Twitter using the hashtag #DearMrPotter, and you can email me directly, pointnorthmedia@gmail.com. I'm always fascinated to read your thoughts here. Let me see as we move through. Elizabeth says, I wonder if McGonagall here was doing that thing moms sometimes do when they try to accomplish their personal goals through their children. No, that's so much worse. Oh my gosh. That's so much worse, right? I mean, is that what Minerva McGonagall is trying? Conceivably, I can't think of a definitive counter argument, so possibly, but that would be much worse. Having McGonagall break these rules and show outright favoritism to a particular student, not for the benefit of the student, but for herself. Yes, to me, that would cross a line, cross even another line. Yes. Yeah, that's pretty tough. Though, as Grumbledore points out, also, would she even have suggested it for another house? We know McGonagall is competitive. Again, this is, in the wake of the Quidditch final here, where McGonagall completely abandons any pretense that there is an open kind of separation between the faculty and the student body. No, she is 100% Gryffindor in that moment and joins in the caterwauling that surrounds the climax. Yeah. Okay. Angela says she sees herself in Hermione, but I don't think she's living through her. I hope so. I can't think of a response. Yeah, but that's fair. Robin asks, there are no other schools in the UK, right? So the Hogwarts is the source of magical education for Europe. Again, we don't have enough to speculate here. All of the kids that we see at Hogwarts are British. So that may lead us to believe, even at this point, without the framework that will later be added, it's not even a framework, without the expansion of our understanding of the Wizarding World that we will get in Goblet of Fire, for example, even at this point, we might assume that there are other wizarding schools in other parts of the world, because otherwise it's a hell of a coincidence that every wizard in the world is British, though I know that there are some British people who would be absolutely comfortable with that as a logical conclusion. Yes. Yes, sorry, she's correcting herself. Yes, the UK, not Europe. Yes, because of course we will get Beauxbaton in Goblet of Fire. Yes, but at this point, yeah, absolutely, it may as well be the only wizarding school in the world. Yes, good. Okay, we've got to keep going on. I know I could talk about this forever, you guys. I could talk about this forever. So that is the time turner. And from there, we're going to get back to Buckbeak. They crept through the trees until they saw the nervous hippogriff tethered to the fence around Hagrid's pumpkin patch. Now? Harry whispered. No, said Hermione. If we steal him now, those committee people will think Hagrid set him free. We've got to wait until they've seen he's tied outside. That's going to give us about 60 seconds, said Harry. This was starting to seem impossible. At that moment, there was a crash of breaking china from inside Hagrid's cabin. That's Hagrid breaking the milk jug, Hermione whispered. I'm going to find Scabbers in a moment. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they heard Hermione's shriek of surprise. Hermione, said Harry suddenly, what if we just run in there and grab Pettigrew? No, said Hermione in a terrified whisper. Don't you understand? We're breaking one of the most important wizarding laws. Nobody's supposed to change time. Nobody. You heard Dumbledore. If we're seen, we'd only be seen by ourselves and Hagrid. Harry, what do you think you'd do if you saw yourself bursting into Hagrid's house? Said Hermione. I think I'd gone mad, said Harry. Or I think there was some dark magic going on. Exactly. You wouldn't understand. You might even attack yourself. Don't you see? Professor McGonagall told me that awful things have happened when wizards have meddled with time. Lots of them have ended up killing their past or future selves by mistake. Okay. Superficially, we have a decent rationale here. Well, we have two separate rationales, right? One of them logical, one of them legalistic. We can't, Harry. We can't intervene. We can't change the past. Though, logically, by extension, we could change the past. Harry, we could. And the fact that we could is one of those time travel problems that we just really can't resolve. We are ill-equipped to resolve those time travel problems within the frame of this seminar discussion. I'm sorry, but that's the way that it is. Yes, it is a knot in our understanding of time travel here. But there are two reasons why we can't. Firstly, the legalistic reason. It's against the law. We can't change the past. Secondly, the practical reason. What if we ran in there? What would you do, Harry? What would you, of our force of ethos in this world, what would you do if you saw yourself running into Hagrid's shack? Well, you'd probably attack. Maybe three of you would cast Expelliarmus at the same time, and then things would go very, very badly indeed. Well, possibly. Though arguably, the reason that Harry would do that is that Harry believes time travel is impossible. Ron believes time travel is impossible. There's every reason to believe that Hagrid believes that time travel is impossible, you guys. The secrecy of the time turner makes using the time turner that much more dangerous. It's a wizard school. Why is this particular kind of magic off limits? Presumably, by extension, because you can use it to change the past. That's why there's a law against it. We don't make laws against things which are impossible. We don't, in the real world, have a law against consorting with werewolves because we don't actually need one. But there is a law against using the time turner to change the past, which, by inference, as I say, means that it is possible. Yes. Good. Loads of them, calls out Grace. Yes, loads of them bothered me too. Okay, loads of them. I wonder to what degree Minerva McGonagall was exaggerating here for Hermione's benefit. Oh no, this has happened hundreds of times. Don't do it. There's lots of proof, because otherwise Hermione's mind goes to, well, if it's never been done, maybe it could be, maybe it couldn't be. I should probably find out. I should probably conduct some tests. This is going to be my senior thesis. This is going to be great. No, this has happened. It's happened lots of times and it's always gone badly. Don't do it. Now, you've got to be super careful. This could be Minerva McGonagall mothering a little bit. But yes, Grace asked, loads of them. How many times has time been meddled with in this universe? Seems like it'd be pretty significant / a well-documented deal. There are a lot of questions about the time turner. One interesting resolution that I don't honestly know to what degree this was intentional and to what degree this is just an interesting byproduct of J.K. Rowling's natural flair for drama. 3 turns should do it, says Dumbledore. So Hermione obligingly turns the hourglass 3 times and they travel 3 hours back into the past. That does put a functional cap on how far back into the past you can go, right? Because, okay, if it takes, let's even say 5 seconds to turn the hourglass, right? That's 15 seconds to travel 3 hours back into the past. That starts becoming unwieldy if you want to travel back a couple of days. Like, you're going to just sit there turning that thing for a couple of minutes to go back a couple of days. You've got to sit there for a good few minutes if you want to go back a week. And if you want to go back a year, well, you're just turning that time turner again and again. And you can't stop. You can't take a bathroom break or get a snack. I mean, I don't know what the practical limit is, but if you do the math, I mean, why didn't someone go back and prevent the rise of Lord Voldemort? Well, okay, we can't do that now, but perhaps we could have done it right after the rise of Lord Voldemort. I don't know. One of the things that we can assume here, I think, and I'm not sure that this is ever outright contradicted by the text, but one of the things that we can assume about the time turner is that the time turner is a pretty recent invention. It kind of has to be. Otherwise, you're right. Presumably, the Ministry would have the time turner and just undo anything bad that happened. Well, you can't change the past. It's against the law. But what are the limits there? I don't know, could a free Sirius Black, right? 13 years ago, could a free Sirius Black have broken into the Ministry and stolen a time turner and gone back a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or however long it took and killed Peter Pettigrew before he gave up the secret to Voldemort? I mean, this is the problem with time travel. Once you can change the past, once you can undo the past, you're tempted to always do that. And it raises the question, why hasn't this been done? But if we assume that the time turner is a pretty recent invention, I mean, that kind of fits with our timeline here, right? Minerva McGonagall is here over the summer holidays. She's reading in Wizarding Times, or she's reading, probably not in the Prophet, right? It would need to be some kind of academic, some peer-reviewed journal of wizarding research, and she finds information about the time turner and says, oh, that'd be lovely. We should try that. That'd be great. But then I suppose loads and loads of times, well, maybe there are other mechanisms by which we can travel back in time. It's a mess. It's a mess, you guys, and I'm getting confused just talking about it. Good. Yes, I want to kill baby Voldemort, says Gildarts Winters. Time for popcorn. Now I'm in the 80s instead. Oh, and stuck with 11 from Stranger Things. Yes, well, okay. Stranger Things season 2 is going to make us all yearn for the 80s in a very particular way. Yes. Good. Yes, exactly. Rohit says how Harry Potter should have ended has Snape turning the time turner something like 500,000 times. There you go. That's your answer, right? And someone can math that out. How long would it take to turn the time turner 500,000 times? Even if it's 3 seconds per turn, even if it's 2 seconds per turn, how long would that take you? How long would you have to sit there just turning that thing and keeping count, right? Can't lose count. If you lose count, you're just, who knows where you're going to appear. It's all going to get very quantum leap very quickly. So back to Buckbeak. We can't intervene. Gosh, I am so behind on my slides. Let's keep moving on here. After rescuing Buckbeak, we move back to the Whomping Willow, and we get to see these events play out from this external perspective, which is, I'm being a little critical of the time travel here, perhaps, or at least a little baffled by the time turner stuff here, but I do love it. I do love any story where you can have future versions of characters watching the actions of their past selves, from Back to the Future to any instance you like of Doctor Who, all the way through to Harry Potter. I'm kind of a big fan of this, yes. They watch Lupin sees a broken branch from the ground and prod the knot on the trunk. The tree stopped fighting, and Lupin too disappeared into the gap in its roots. If you'd only grabbed the cloak, said Harry. It's just lying there. He turned to Hermione. If I just dashed out now and grabbed it, Snape would never be able to get it, and Harry, we mustn't be seen. How can you stand this? He asked Hermione fiercely. Just standing here and watching it happen. He hesitated. I'm going to grab the cloak. Harry, no! Hermione seized the back of Harry's robes not a moment too soon. Just then they heard a burst of song. It was Hagrid making his way up to the castle, singing at the top of his voice and weaving slightly as he walked. A large bottle was swinging from his hands. See, Hermione whispered. See what would have happened? We've got to keep out of sight. No, Buckbeak. The hippogriff was making frantic attempts to get to Hagrid again. Harry seized his rope too, straining to hold Buckbeak back. They watched Hagrid meander tipsily up to the castle. He was gone. Buckbeak stopped fighting to get away. His head drooped sadly. Barely 2 minutes later, the castle doors flew open again, and Snape came charging out of them, running toward the willow. Harry's fists clenched as they watched Snape skid to a halt next to the tree, looking around. He grabbed the cloak and held it up. Get your filthy hands off of it, Harry snarled under his breath. We can't be seen, we can't be seen, and we also can't take action. I mean, there is a logical argument against taking action. If we take the invisibility cloak now, Snape would never have been able to creep into the Shrieking Shack. We would never then have been forced to disarm him in the way that we did. Things would have gone very differently. Without that delaying action, who knows what would have happened? We also probably would never have got the whole story. But we almost certainly would never have been in the place that we needed to be for Dumbledore to tell us that we should travel back in time and do this thing. We can't change the past. There is a ripple effect logical conclusion that we can come to here. But also, we might get seen. Okay, can't spend any more time on this. Got to keep moving on. This is Harry thinking about the encounter with the Dementors at the lake, trying to figure this out. There's only one thing it could have been to make the Dementors go, said Harry. A real Patronus, a powerful one. But who conjured it? Harry didn't say anything. He was thinking back to the person he'd seen on the other bank of the lake. He knew who he thought it had been. But how could it have been? Didn't you see what they looked like? Said Hermione eagerly. Was it one of the teachers? No, said Harry. He wasn't a teacher. But it must have been a really powerful wizard to drive all those Dementors away. If the Patronus was shining so brightly, didn't it light him up? Couldn't you see? Yeah, I saw him, said Harry slowly. But maybe I imagined it. I wasn't thinking straight. I passed out right afterward. Who do you think it was? I think... Harry swallowed, knowing how strange this was going to sound. I think it was my dad. Harry glanced up at Hermione and saw that her mouth was fully open now. She was gazing at him with a mixture of alarm and pity. Harry, your dad's, well, dead, she said quietly. I know that, said Harry quickly. You think you saw his ghost? I don't know. No, he looked solid. But then maybe I was seeing things, said Harry. But from what I could see, it looked like him. I've got photos of him. Hermione was still looking at him as though worried about his sanity. I know it sounds crazy, said Harry flatly. He turned to look at Buckbeak, who was digging his beak into the ground, apparently searching for worms. But he wasn't really watching Buckbeak. He was thinking about his father and about his father's 3 oldest friends, Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs. Had all 4 of them been out of the grounds tonight? Wormtail had reappeared this evening when everyone thought he was dead. Was it so impossible his father had done the same? Had he been seeing things across the lake? The figure had been too far away to see distinctly, yet he had felt sure for a moment before he lost consciousness. I'm glad that we're reading this in one chapter. I'm glad that I'm not compelled to, end tonight's session here and wonder aloud, but was it James Potter on the bank of the lake? No, it wasn't James Potter on the bank of the lake. And you guys all know that because you've done the reading and because it is implausible, but not impossible that it should have been James Potter. I like this very much as a turn. I like this very much that Harry here is clutching at an explanation that he wants to be true. An explanation that doesn't make 0 sense given all the extraordinary things that he's experienced in the last 24 hours. An explanation that is made credible by the return of Peter Pettigrew, by the new revelations about Remus Lupin and Sirius Black. It's possible, but not possible. Harry is defined too much by the death of his father. He's defined, narratively speaking, too much by the death of his father, which is why I think the book holds us at arm's reach, or the book kind of keeps us at arm's reach from Harry here. We are not allowed really to believe that it was James. We get Harry's perspective, but we don't get the narrative voice intruding on Harry's rationale and supporting it. And the narrative voice does do that in other parts of the book. The narrative voice will come in. Harry thought that maybe it was this and he was right. Or Harry thought that maybe it was this and the certainty was absolute. Like, the narrative voice itself will reassure us that Harry's on the right track or the wrong track sometimes. Here, the narrative voice just backs right off. The narrative voice gives Harry a kind of emotional privacy here, a kind of emotional totality here. I know it sounds crazy, said Harry flatly. He turned to look at Buckbeak, who was digging his beak into the ground, apparently searching for worms, but he wasn't really watching Buckbeak. He was thinking about his father and his father's 3 oldest friends. He was thinking about it. That's all that that's all the narrative voice tells us. Though the previous beat there from the narrative voice, Hermione was still looking at him as though worried about his sanity. I mean, if the narrative voice intrudes, again, the narrative voice is not saying Hermione was worried, or I guess even then it would still be from Hermione's perspective, but the narrative voice does not come in and say Harry was crazy or Harry looked crazy or Harry was questioning his own sanity. No, we just get the account. And it's so personal and human. And here we are dealing with the clash of these enormously powerful forces, these enormously complex impulses throughout this story. We're not really dealing with family, weirdly, in a story that, has had Harry revisiting the moment of his parents' death more often than in any other book in the series, where we're getting this perspective. It's an odd book, because it's a book that's absolutely about family and friendship, except that it's not really about family and friendship. And it's a book that's absolutely about Lord Voldemort and the sins of the past, except it's not really about Lord Voldemort and the sins of the past. It's setting that up. It's creating a framework where that is the story that we're going to tell over the rest of the series, but we're not doing it yet. Here we're focused on something much more personal, something much more intimate to Harry, which is the hope. He wants to believe that this is true, but that is not the same as believing that this is true. Yeah, we've got a couple observations here in the chat here about ghosts, and Hermione's like, ghost, maybe ghost. There's nothing in our understanding of ghosts in Harry Potter that would make us think that these people in particular would come back as ghosts, particularly not that they would manifest as ghosts for the first time on the distant side of a frozen lake. And can ghosts cast spells? Could a ghost cast Expecto Patronum? Well, we have to be reminded that Expecto Patronum is a very rare spell, and that most people don't know that spell. So it's possible that ghosts can perform some simple acts of magic. We just don't know. We don't have a thorough taxonomy of ghosts yet. Yeah, unfortunately. Good, okay. Robin says, I love the symmetry of this, though, that the Dementors make Harry hear his parents' last moment, but the Patronus allows him to find a deep, powerful connection to his father he didn't know was there. Right. This is the point, right? Because this is not the powerful moment. This is not what matters about this storyline in this book. This is a kind of a bridging detail that gets us to the actual conclusion, which is, surprising no one, that Harry learns that he is the answer to his problems, that he is the one who takes action. Let's get to that. There was a bush on the very edge of the water. Harry threw himself behind it, peering desperately through the leaves. On the opposite bank, the glimmers of silver were suddenly extinguished. A terrified excitement shot through him. Any moment now. Come on, he muttered, staring about. Where are you? Dad, come on. But no one came. Harry raised his head to look at the circle of Dementors across the lake. One of them was lowering its hood. It was time for the rescuer to appear, but no one was coming to help this time. And then it hit him. He understood. He hadn't seen his father. He had seen himself. Harry flung himself out from behind the bush and pulled out his wand. Expecto Patronum, he yelled, and out of the end of his wand burst not a shapeless cloud of mist, but a blinding, dazzling silver animal. He screwed up his eyes, trying to see what it was. It looked like a horse. It was galloping silently away from him across the black surface of the lake. He saw it lower its head and charge at the swarming Dementors. Now it was galloping around and around the black shapes on the ground, and the Dementors were falling back, scattering, retreating into the darkness. They were gone. The Patronus turned. It was cantering back to Harry across the still surface of the water. It wasn't a horse. It wasn't a unicorn either. It was a stag. It was shining brightly as the moon above. It was coming back to him. It stopped on the bank. Its hooves made no mark on the soft ground as it stared at Harry with its large silver eyes. Slowly it bowed its antlered head, and Harry realized, "Prongs," he whispered. But as his trembling fingertips stretched toward the creature, it vanished. Harry stood there, hands still outstretched. Then, with a great leap of his heart, he heard hooves behind him. He whirled around and saw Hermione dashing toward him, dragging Buckbeak behind her. "What did you do?" she said fiercely. "You said you were only going to keep a lookout." What did you do? The Hermione Granger story. Harry here takes unprecedented action. In a moment of crisis, which weirdly isn't treated at all like a moment of crisis, he takes unprecedented action. What has changed for Harry? Why is he now capable of casting the Expecto Patronum charm, the Patronus charm, and summoning forth a full-fledged Patronus, not the Patronus effect, not the silver mist that wards off the Dementors, but an actual Patronus? What has changed for Harry? Well, retroactively, we're able to look at this as a manifestation of his father. But he doesn't know that this is going to be a manifestation. Let me refine that thought a little more carefully. Not a manifestation of his father, a symbolic representation of his father. There is a symmetry here between his father's Animagus form and Harry's Patronus form, okay? Obviously, there is a powerful connection there. It means something to Harry. Prongs, he says, and he recognizes that connection. But he doesn't know that until after it happens. So it is not the knowledge or even the belief in Harry's father that allows him to cast this charm. We have to look very carefully at the text. But no one came. Harry raised his head to look at the circle of Dementors across the lake. One of them was lowering its hood. It was time for the rescuer to appear, but no one was coming to help this time. And then it hit him. He understood. He hadn't seen his father. He had seen himself. Harry flung himself out from behind the bush and pulled out his wand. There's no moment of hesitation. We even end that thought with an M dash. He had seen himself. Hard cut. Harry flung himself out from behind the bush and pulled out his wand. Expecto Patronum, he yelled, and the stag bursts forth and wards off the Dementors. What has changed? Harry understands that it's him. Harry understands perhaps, arguably, in some sense that he is going to succeed, but he also understands that it's him. He now knows that he is capable of doing this thing. He has seen himself do this thing. He's had the proof of it. There's no self-doubt. There's no hesitation. He knows. He apprehends, perhaps arguably for the first time, and certainly apprehends for the first time in a way which is incontrovertible, his own capacity, his own agency. This is such an important moment for Harry Potter. It's such an important moment for, anyone. We go all the way back to that old kind of aphoristic and somewhat hackneyed trope, what would you attempt if you knew you couldn't fail? What would you do if you knew that you were going to succeed? Harry knows that he's going to succeed, so he has no thought of failure. This is very much, of course, tied into Harry's own heroic exceptionalism, Harry's classical heroism, this idea that, he's unrestricted, he's unbound by the rules which govern other people. Self-belief is, for Harry Potter, something approaching a superpower. And it's no coincidence that that is going to be a major fulcrum around which his character will turn for the rest of the series. But this is a moment of undiminished capability. This is, of course, I talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien all the time in my other podcast, There and Back Again. And I keep thinking of these moments when we see characters kind of unmasked, uncloaked in their grandeur and their splendor. When Frodo's in the Wraith world and he beholds, Glorfindel, and he sees what an elf really looks like to those who have eyes to see. Or when Gandalf kind of casts aside his guise and is the wizard unmasked. Or when Aragorn is suddenly, the king instead of the ranger from the north. We get these moments of absolute transition, which have nothing to do with have nothing to do with transformation and everything to do with realization, right? These are moments of epiphany. These are moments of apotheosis, almost. Harry is never more Harry, arguably, than he is at this moment. Self-doubt is not a fundamental part of Harry's character, and it sure as hell isn't a fundamental part of Harry's heroism. And self-doubt can be a part of heroism. So there are heroic archetypes out there which are defined by self-doubt, which are defined by not even self-doubt, but a kind of self-analysis. That's not Harry Potter. He is most heroic when he is unencumbered by doubt, when he is illuminated from within by certainty. And this is an enormously powerful moment in that, which is why I think the book kind of holds the speculation about James at a distance. It doesn't want us to go too far into that. Yeah. Oh, we've got Tolkien Lover with us. Good. I'm so glad Tolkien Lover is joining us tonight. It's good to have you here. Excellent. Yes. I'm so sorry. I'm doing a worse job than normal keeping up with the Crowdcast chat here. I do apologize. Yes, Ryan says, right, so this is the other side of this whole discussion, right? This is the kind of the consequential side of this argument, or of this sequence that we want to use to validate the initial impulse, but we can't, right? What Harry gets out of this experience is huge and beautiful and significant. As Ryan says, I love this Harry Stag scene. Given what Patronuses represent, it's like finding something out about himself, like a piece of his soul. Beautiful. Ryan, I completely agree. I think that's a gorgeous observation. And it's really tempting to kind of fold that back into the explanation. Why is Harry capable of summoning the Patronus? Because it's his dad, because it means his dad. It represents James Potter. But Harry doesn't know that. He learns it, and it will become valuable later. Yeah, good. Disney Dell says, Harry had confidence that he could produce a full Patronus because he saw himself do it. Total bootstrap paradox that hurts my brain. Yeah, again, it's the emotional impact of the scene more than it is perhaps the logical, rational consequence of the scene. But yes, good. Oh, there's so much that I'm missing out here. This is so beautiful in the Crowdcast chat. If you guys don't join me live for these shows, you absolutely should, by the way, because taking part in the chat, I know that taking part in the live chat is kind of a full-time occupation, and that you guys basically talk to each other for 90 minutes while I do the live session. And I know that most of you listen to the podcast again after the fact, but it's an enormously wonderful thing. And if I was not doing the live session right now, I would definitely be in the chat hanging out with you all. Yeah, good. All right. So that is the Patronus reveal. And then we hurry all the way back to the school, and, well, Severus Snape, he's angry. Bam! The door to the hospital wing burst open. Fudge, Snape, and Dumbledore came striding into the ward. Dumbledore alone looked calm. Indeed, he looked as though he was quite enjoying himself. Fudge appeared angry, but Snape was beside himself. "Out with it, Potter!" he bellowed. "What did you do?" "Professor Snape!" shrieked Madame Pomfrey. "Control yourself!" "See here, Snape, be reasonable," said Fudge. "The door's been locked. We just saw. They helped him escape. I know it!" Snape howled, pointing at Harry and Hermione. His face was twisted. Spit was flying from his mouth. "Calm down, man," Fudge barked. "You're talking nonsense." "You don't know Potter!" shrieked Snape. "He did it! I know he did it!" "That will do, Severus," said Dumbledore quietly. "Think about what you're saying. This door has been locked since I left the ward 10 minutes ago. Madame Pomfrey, have these students left their beds?" "Of course not," said Madame Pomfrey, bristling. "I would have heard them." "Well, there you have it, Severus," said Dumbledore calmly. "Unless you are suggesting that Harry and Hermione are able to be in two places at once, I'm afraid I don't see any point in troubling them further." Dumbledore gaslighting Severus Snape here. Maybe not his finest moment. Maybe not Dumbledore's finest hour. Just totally gaslighting Snape here. Snape is in something of a defensible position here, but hey, we're back to Harry's exceptionalism. We're back to Harry breaking the rules to good effect and not necessarily dealing with the consequences. The worst part here, the part that I have the most trouble with here, is Dumbledore making Madame Pomfrey complicit in this gaslighting. Like, don't do that, Dumbledore. This is super shady. The fact that he looks like he's quite enjoying himself, his relationship with Snape, a complicated one. But here we see Snape's mania. We see Snape more unhinged than he has ever been. Even in the Shrieking Shack, he was more himself than he is now. "You don't know Potter," shrieked Snape. "He did it. I know he did it." He's shrieking at the Minister of Magic. And we were just talking back at the beginning of tonight's reading, I don't know, 4 hours ago when we started this live session, we were just talking about Snape being different around the minister, different when he's dealing with a person more like himself, different when he's dealing with someone where the lines of authority and agency are somewhat more complicated than he's accustomed to. But now he's lost his mind. It's pretty tough here. Yeah. Jamie says, "So my gut reaction is always to hate Snape and think he's holding a grudge against Sirius and Lupin. But when we think about Snape's underlying motivation for, excuse me, it's scrolling very quickly. When we think about Snape's underlying motivation for everything, we understand why he hates Sirius so much. But his hatred for Harry, I can never defend." Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. We'll get lots of opportunity to talk about Sirius Snape between now and the end. John is asking, was Fudge a Slytherin? To the best of my recollection, we don't know. If I had to guess, I would say yes. And that's not just a comment about the, ambitious ascendancy of Slytherins, but Snape does trust him. He seems to believe in him in a way that he probably wouldn't if he belonged to any other house. I don't recall Cornelius Fudge being given a house at any point. There may be a reference on Pottermore, but nothing springs to mind. Do any of you guys know? Gildart says, "I think he was a Hufflepuff and not a good one." Yes, I don't know. I have no idea. Yeah, good. As Kate says, Snape is right, and he knows that Dumbledore knows. This is the worst thing, right? He knows that he's being gaslit here. He knows what happened. I mean, he's not right. He's not correct. He doesn't believe about Peter Pettigrew. So his factual knowledge is somewhat lacking, but he knows that the tricks are afoot here. Yeah. Elizabeth says, "No way people would appoint a Slytherin as minister, right?" Well, is this a book 3 Slytherin or a book 6 Slytherin? Where are we in J.K. Rowling's kind of adjustment of the houses and her shift in our understanding of Slytherins? Are Slytherins outright villains at this point or not? We're adjusting. Certainly we're led to be suspicious of the ministry throughout this book. We've talked about the ways in which the many myriad ways, good Lord, in which the ministry has failed the wizarding world at this point. We've talked about the fact that Cornelius Fudge is not outright corrupt, but is certainly a politician, that he is a political appointee at the Ministry of Magic. Thus, that speaks a certain level of ambition coupled with a kind of ruthlessness, putting the Dementors at Hogwarts against Dumbledore's objections. There's a kind of ruthlessness there. There's a kind of pragmatic ruthlessness there, which would be more comfortable in coming from a Slytherin than it would from any other kind of character that we've seen. But yeah. To the best of my recollection, I don't know. Yeah, good. Okay. Gildarts confirms. Gildarts confirms that according to Pottermore, there have been Slytherin ministers, and they did as right as they could. Which, yeah, I don't necessarily disbelieve that. I think that a Slytherin minister, again, by the later iteration of Slytherin, would be perfectly serviceable. Career politicians, yeah, Slytherin exists for career politicians, you guys, absolutely. Rahit asks, you talk about the shift in the houses of what the houses are in the books. At what point does that transition take place? Arguably, it takes place in Chamber of Secrets. I mean, we begin to pivot away in Chamber of Secrets from the idea that there are, what is that Twitter meme? As we know, there are 3 types of children: good children, bad children, and miscellaneous. In Chamber of Secrets, when we get introduced to our Hufflepuff power trio, then we start to open up the idea that Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws are not bystanders, you guys. They're kids at this school too. In this book, because of our increased moral complexity, I could see Prisoner of Azkaban kind of leading the charge in a reappraisal of Slytherin. This is the first time that we're getting, the idea of villainous characters or characters who are irreducibly problematic still being somewhat heroic, which kind of speaks to the idea that we're expanding beyond our very simple black and white notions of good and evil in the first 2 books. So I think that you could argue that here. Unfortunately, within the pages of this book, Slytherin basically functions, is represented in 2 ways, and that's Quidditch, where they're outright villains, they're the outright bad guys, and Snape, who's an outright bad guy. So arguably, we're expanding our understanding of the houses in this book, but definitely by the time we get to Goblet of Fire, we're going to have a different perspective on Slytherin. And then, yeah, I think Goblet of Fire is, for our concept of the houses in general, more of a turning point. But this is the book, of course, where, yes, we're introducing the ideas of a complicated moral landscape, as well as questioning Harry's exceptional status, and and by proxy, by extension, the exceptional status of all Gryffindors. And that, I think, is interestingly textured, at least. I'm sure that if you did a very close reading, you could find arguments that suggest that Prisoner of Azkaban is the turning point where that starts to happen. But certainly Goblet of Fire will support that theory. It will support that evolution as we move forward, which is one of the reasons I think that Goblet of Fire is more traditionally recognized as the turning point in the Harry Potter series. Yeah. Good. Okay. Excellent. Let's keep on. Gosh, I have, in theory, 4 minutes left. I also have, in actuality, 6 slides left. So we're going to run a little late, you guys. There's no way that I'm cutting tonight's session short. So, hey, buckle up. Fellow seems quite unbalanced, said Fudge, staring after him. I'd watch out for him if I were you, Dumbledore. Oh, he's not unbalanced, said Dumbledore quietly. He's just suffered a severe disappointment. He's not the only one, puffed Fudge. The Daily Prophet's going to have a field day. We had Black cornered and he slipped through our fingers yet again. All it needs now is for the story of that hippogriff's escape to get out, and I'll be a laughingstock. Well, I'd better go and notify the ministry. And the Dementors, said Dumbledore. They'll be removed from the school, I trust. Oh, yes, they'll have to go, said Fudge, running his fingers distractedly through his hair. Never dreamed they'd attempt to administer the kiss on an innocent boy completely out of control. No, I'll have them packed off back to Azkaban tonight. Perhaps we should think about dragons at the school entrance. Hagrid would like that, said Dumbledore, smiling at Harry and Hermione. As he and Fudge left the dormitory, Madame Pomfrey hurried to the door and locked it again. Muttering angrily to herself, she headed back to her office. So, I want to kind of frame this very carefully, because when we're reading the book and we're all caught up in the action and the excitement and the toing and the froing, and we resolve the Time Turner plot, and it's all great, and hey, the good guys have won, and Snape's furious, and it's great, we're ready now. But what just happened? What just happened in this scene here? How was the plot of Prisoner of Azkaban just resolved? Sirius Black has just escaped. Sirius Black, who has spent an academic year trying to kill Harry Potter, ostensibly, right? There is no proof, as Dumbledore confirms in the previous scene, there is no proof that Sirius Black is anything other than a mass murderer who wants Harry Potter dead. We know that he broke into Gryffindor Tower. We know that he has been patrolling Hogwarts all year long. He wants Harry dead. And he has just escaped in inexplicable circumstances from Professor Flitwick's office. Well, obviously, it's time for the Dementors to go home. I mean, nothing more we can do now, right? I mean, look at the time. It's the end of the book. We should probably wrap things up. But as always, I think there was something more subtle happening here. Why is Cornelius Fudge removing the Dementors from Hogwarts? Because they tried to perform the kiss on an innocent boy. They crossed a line. Is it a moral line? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because the Dementors were capable of doing this at any point, as Fudge must have known. He must have understood how dangerous the Dementors were and that there was a non-zero chance that things were going to go very, very badly at Hogwarts. He had to be seen to take action, which is why he sent the Dementors to Hogwarts from Azkaban in the first place. But now, well, now we have a public relations disaster. Now the story of what happened to Harry is out, or is going to be out in the very near future. And of course, we all have a soft spot for Harry, don't we? The fact that the Dementors tried to kiss the boy who lived is completely untenable. It has created an untenable position for Cornelius Fudge. So he has to remove the Dementors. He has no choice. Back to Azkaban tonight. Yes, it is entirely possible, likely, in fact, if you believe the narrative that Cornelius Fudge obviously sincerely believes, it is absolutely likely that Sirius Black flew somehow from that tower, zipped into the Forbidden Forest, and is watching us right now. What is going to protect Harry tomorrow, or the next day, or at any point up until he gets back on the Hogwarts Express? In fact, what is going to protect Harry when he gets back on the Hogwarts Express? What is the plan for the summer vacation? Is Harry going to stay at the Leaky Cauldron? Is he going to stay under the protection of the Ministry of Magic? Is he going to be sent into some kind of witness protection program off to Egypt with Charlie Weasley? Who knows? We have no plan to cover that exigency right now. But the Dementors have to go. The Dementors just have to go. Yes, as Angela says, Fudge thought he could control the situation. Now he's cleaning / covering everything up. A little more covering than cleaning, I think, here at this point. But yes. Yes. And Dumbledore, of course, because Dumbledore knows the truth, Dumbledore believes Harry, he's supportive of Fudge, right? It's not that no one knows the truth. It's that right now, Cornelius Fudge does not have the authority levied him by clear and present danger to supersede Dumbledore. He doesn't even have motivation to go up against Dumbledore. In the absence of that absolute pressing motivation, it's far easier to let Dumbledore handle Hogwarts. And Dumbledore, because he knows the truth, is more than happy to get rid of the Dementors and isn't worried about security. He's not pushing for the protection of Harry or, hey, any other child here at Hogwarts. What do we see here? Well, this is the first beat. Okay, arguably, Dumbledore gaslighting Snape is the first beat, but this is one of a series of beats right here at the end of the book where a quick superficial read will make you feel as though justice has been done. The truth is out. Everyone knows what happened. Okay, there are still complicating factors, but Sirius Black has escaped and he didn't do it anyway, and it's all okay, and Harry's going to be just fine, so let's get rid of the Dementors. Emotionally, that works. Logically, it doesn't work unless you factor in the meager and mean-spirited corruption of the Ministry of Magic and the Minister of Magic. He has to withdraw the demand. And again, we can be sure of this. The line that he offers isn't justification, right? J.K. Rowling didn't need to include this conversation in the story. We could have just had Dumbledore coming to Harry, as he has at the end of the previous two books, and say, well, of course, everything's worked out for the best and things are terrible, but let's push on to next year. I'm sure there'll be another disaster that only you can solve. It's not that. We get the politics here. The Dementors tried to kiss an innocent boy. That's real bad, you guys. So of course Cornelius Fudge is backing off. We have no faith now in the Ministry. We have some faith in Hogwarts, at least to the extent that Hogwarts is synonymous with Albus Dumbledore. But a lot of our faith in the structures of this juvenile world has fallen away too. We're moving into a darker world, and we're moving into a darker world in two ways. Let's deal with Hagrid and Buckbeak. A shadow fell across them, and they looked up to see a very bleary-eyed Hagrid mopping his sweaty face with one of his tablecloth-sized handkerchiefs and beaming down at them. No, I shouldn't feel happy after what happened last night, he said. I mean, Black escaping again and everything, but guess what? What? They said, pretending to look curious. Beaky! He escaped! He's free! Been celebrating all night! That's wonderful, said Hermione, giving Ron a reproving look because he looked as though he was close to laughing. Yeah, kind of tied him up properly, said Hagrid, gazing happily out over the grounds. I was worried this morning, mind. Thought he might have met Professor Lupin on the grounds, but Lupin says he never ate anything last night. What? Said Harry quickly. Blimey, haven't you heard? Said Hagrid, his smile fading a little. He lowered his voice, even though there was nobody in sight. Snape told all the Slytherins this morning. Thought everyone would know by now Professor Lupin's a werewolf, see? And he was loose on the grounds last night. He's packing now, of course. He's packing? Said Harry, alarmed. Why? Leaving, isn't he? Said Hagrid, looking surprised that Harry had to ask. Resigned first thing this morning. Says he can't risk it happening again. It's a minor point. I don't love the fact that Hagrid doesn't know about Lupin being a werewolf. Not because Hagrid should be involved in that whole complicated marauder backstory, but because Hagrid knows animals. Hagrid knows more about the care of magical creatures than any living person. And I would have loved a little beat here where he said, of course, I figured it out first day that Lupin showed up, but I'm not going to say nothing bad about a werewolf. Like, that would have been a lovely beat, but we don't get that. Instead, we get another challenge to the temporal authority of Albus Dumbledore. We get another challenge to the structures of Hogwarts. Snape blabbed. Snape broke his compact with Dumbledore. And you can be absolutely sure that this is retribution. All of you saying in the Crowdcast chat earlier, Dumbledore is lying to Snape, he's gaslighting Snape, and Snape knows it. Yes, he absolutely is. Snape absolutely does. So he has his recourse. He accidentally lets it slip to the Slytherin kids, knowing, of course, that the Slytherin kids will spread it around the school. It'll get back to the parents, that the outcry over the employment of a werewolf will absolutely challenge Dumbledore's position here at school. That's a fringe benefit because the first thing that it will do is force Remus Lupin to resign, as he does. I do want to focus here too on this little beat here. Hagrid's belief concerning what happened, right? So Buckbeak is found guilty on this trumped up charge. Buckbeak is found guilty and is to be executed. Then they go out to execute him, and he's buggered off. Hagrid's thrilled about this. So thrilled, in fact, that we see him going up to the castle with his large bottle, his jug, his whatever, and he celebrates all night, which is why a very bleary-eyed Hagrid mopping his sweaty face with one of his tablecloth-sized handkerchiefs. This must be a terrible hangover, and when you're the size of Hagrid, that's a lot of hangover that you have to contend with. But what does Hagrid think happened? Beaky, he escaped. He's free. Been celebrating all night. Can't have tied him up properly, said Hagrid, gazing happily out over the grounds. I was worried this morning, mind. Thought he might have met Professor Lupin on the grounds, but Lupin says he never ate anything last night. Hagrid believes that he didn't tie Beaky up properly, and thus Buckbeak escaped. Hagrid has failed in a primary duty here. He has screwed up pretty badly. I mean, if we assume that Buckbeak was in fact guilty of the crimes of which he was committed, right? And Hagrid's carelessness here, Hagrid's oversight here has led to the escape of a dangerous creature, which again is the way that it works, right? That's what the Ministry believes, at least ostensibly. Hagrid is relieved that his own incompetence has led to the release of Buckbeak. There's no other justification for it. Can't have tied him up properly. Oh, well. No guilt associated with that. No worry associated with that. Certainly no punishment associated with that. Dumbledore asks Hagrid, so what happened with Buckbeak? And Hagrid's like, you'll never guess. I suck at knots. I was never a Boy Scout, like not even for a minute. I just looped the rope around his neck. Of course he flew off. Funny story. There's no consequence to this. There's an interesting little detail that we should tease out here, which is that Hagrid didn't deliberately let Buckbeak go. But if it happens as a consequence of his carelessness, if his intent is to do good, but because of his apparent ineptitude, his self-avowed ineptitude in this regard, Buckbeak escapes, then Hagrid is not responsible for that. Not morally responsible for that, not legally responsible for that. Hey, we can all just wash our hands of the whole thing. Buckbeak's probably fine living in the Forbidden Forest. It's all okay. My only concern was not, hey, that the Ministry is going to go and hunt him down, or that I am going to be immediately fired from Hogwarts. No. His only concern is, I was worried that Professor Lupin was going to eat him. That, of course, hasn't happened. Yes. Bryce is giving us in the magical justice system, hippogriff crimes are considered especially heinous. These are their stories. Dun dun. Oh, and Joseph is maybe a little harsh here. When you're Hagrid, I guess you get used to relying on your own incompetence. Not just when you're Hagrid, you're accustomed to your own incompetence, but you rely on your own incompetence. That's, wow. Gildarts Winter is known for her puns, says, I am not good at tying rope. Not there, K-N-O-T. I'm afraid not. Puns, insert puns. Yes, good. Okay, let me see. Oh, Tolkien Lover says, I always cry when Lupin leaves. I know. Okay, let's do this, you guys. It's the end of our chapter. We only have a few slides left to go, but we kind of have to do this one. This time tomorrow, the owls will start arriving from parents. They'll not want a werewolf teaching their children, Harry. And after last night, I see their point. I could have bitten any of you. That must never happen again. You're the best defense against the dark arts teacher we've ever had, said Harry. Don't go. Lupin shook his head and didn't speak. He carried on emptying his drawers. Then, while Harry was trying to think of a good argument to make him stay, Lupin said, From what the headmaster told me this morning, you saved a lot of lives last night, Harry. If I'm proud of anything I've done this year, it's how much you've learned. Tell me about your patronus. How do you know about that? Said Harry, distracted. What else could have driven the Dementors back? Harry told Lupin what had happened. When he'd finished, Lupin was smiling again. Yes, your father was always a stag when he transformed, he said. You guessed right, that's why we called him Prongs. Lupin threw his last few books into his case, closed the desk drawers, and turned to look at Harry. Yeah, I brought this from the Shrieking Shack last night, he said, handing Harry back the invisibility cloak. And he hesitated, then held out the Marauder's map, too. I am no longer your teacher, so I don't feel guilty about giving you back this as well. It's no use to me, and I dare say you, Ron, and Hermione will find uses for it. Harry took the map and grinned. You told me Moony, Wormtail, Patfoot, and Prongs would have wanted to lure me out of school. You said they'd have thought it was funny. And so we would have, said Lupin, now reaching down to close his case. I have no hesitation in saying that James would have been highly disappointed if his son had never found any of the secret passages out of the castle. The leave-taking here of Professor Remus Lupin. You're the best defense against the dark arts teacher we've ever had, said Harry, because the first one was literally Voldemort and the second just the worst. So the fact that you're a werewolf, if you were a werewolf all the time and you ate some kids, like, we could probably throw you Seamus Finnegan, like, it would be fine. You'd still be the best defense against the dark arts teacher we've ever had. It's an emotional leave-taking here, but we have another beat here. Another beat that feels like justice. If you read it quickly, it feels like justice. Well, it's the end of the school term and everyone's going their own ways. And, you know, Remus Lupin, his life now is going to be different. He knows the truth about Sirius Black, presumably now. So everything's going to be better in some ill-defined way. But this is the absence of justice. He's being hounded out by Severus Snape. If you'll forgive the pun, he's being hounded out by Severus Snape. Snape deliberately broke his compact with Dumbledore and spread the word of Lupin's lycanthropy here. This is another beat where the forces of good have not won. This is another beat of injustice. This is not how this scene should play out. If the world were properly restored to justice, this would not happen. And again, we can confirm this. We can confirm this by the gifts that Lupin gives to Harry. Here's your invisibility cloak. Here's your Marauder's map. Do use these responsibly, Harry. I mean, definitely don't use these to get into more scrapes and to, you know, fight the man next year at Hogwarts, which you definitely will, by the way. Harry here is empowered by Professor Lupin, both physically empowered through the gift, the return, I suppose, of the invisibility cloak and the return of the Marauder's map to very powerful and somewhat suspect magical items, but he's also empowered by the connection back to his father. Yes, James would have been disappointed if you hadn't discovered the secret passages leading out of the castle. You're a marauder, Harry. You're a marauder, Harry. Yeah, this continuation of Harry's anti-authoritarian role within Hogwarts is explicit. That takes us through to the end as I catch up with the chat again. Yes, as C-Star says, parents have a good reason to worry about a werewolf endangering their children, tragic as it is here. They do, except that this is a werewolf who can 100% manage his lycanthropy. We have the Wolfsbane potion. It exists now. There's no reason, really, for him to leave school. There's no reason to worry. I see their point. I could have bitten any of you. That must never happen again. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to go away from the one thing that can make you control your lycanthropy, Lupin? That everyone will be safe, that you will never harm anyone ever again. Hogwarts is literally the safest place on earth for you right now, particularly if everyone knows you're a werewolf. This is another situation where the keeping of the secret seems to work against the security of the secret itself. Why don't we just tell everyone you're a werewolf, and then we can take proper precautions? And then the whole class will be lining up at the end of your last Defense Against the Dark Arts class before the full moon to double check that you've taken your wolfsbane potion. But no, we keep it secret, and that is dangerous in and of itself. Again, there's something broader there. The whole notion of secrets, particularly with, the Fidelius charm, the secrets and secret keepers, there's something else there about the preservation of knowledge. There's something else happening under the surface of this book about the preservation and dissemination of knowledge, right? We get the Fidelius charm. We get the kind of off the books teaching of the patronus charm, which is absolutely essential to saving Harry right there at the end of the book, to saving everyone right there at the end of the book. We get the Time Turner secret. We get the lycanthropy secret. We get the secret surrounding the Marauders map and surrounding the Marauders themselves. Then we get the secret of Sirius Black and the secret of what actually happened that night so many years ago. The isolation and preservation, the specific preservation of knowledge within this book, again, this is a book ostensibly about a school. It is ostensibly about a place where knowledge is freely shared and academic inquiry is positively encouraged. We've always had a problem with that with regard to Hogwarts. There's always been, things which you ought not to be taught and things which you ought not to know and things which won't be told to you until it's absolutely necessary, and a giant restricted section in the library, Knowledge is power. Knowledge is dangerous in the wizarding world. But when we disempower people by keeping that knowledge from them, we don't remove the danger. We just expand the scope of the danger. Yes, this is a sad part, says Bryce. Lupin was never mean to Snape as teenagers, but he takes out his anger from James and Sirius. He takes his anger out on Lupin by getting him kicked out of the place he was safest. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jamie says, yes, so after this, he no longer has access to Wolfsbane. Will Dumbledore still somehow make sure he has it? I hope so. But you're right. I mean, it's problematic. Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. That takes us to the end of chapter 21 here, 15 minutes over. Let's push into chapter 22. We have 3 and only 3 slides for chapter 22. I will post again. Pettigrew owes his life to you. You have sent Voldemort a deputy who is in your debt. When one wizard saves another wizard's life, it creates a certain bond between them. And I'm very much mistaken if Voldemort wants his servant in the debt of Harry Potter. I don't want a connection with Pettigrew, said Harry. He betrayed my parents. This is magic at its deepest. It's most impenetrable, Harry. But trust me, the time may come when you will be very glad you saved Pettigrew's life. Harry couldn't imagine what that would be. Dumbledore looked as though he knew what Harry was thinking. I knew your father very well, both at Hogwarts and later, Harry, he said gently. He would have saved Pettigrew too, I'm sure of it. Harry looked up at him. Dumbledore wouldn't laugh. He could tell Dumbledore. I thought it was my dad who'd conjured my patronus. I mean, when I saw myself across the lake, I thought I was seeing him. An easy mistake to make, said Dumbledore softly. I expect you're tired of hearing it, but you do look extraordinarily like James, except for the eyes. You have your mother's eyes. Harry shook his head. It was stupid thinking it was him, he muttered. I mean, I knew he was dead. You think the dead we loved ever truly leave us? You think that we don't recall them more clearly than ever in times of great trouble? Your father is alive in you, Harry, and shows himself most plainly when you have need of him. How else can you produce that particular patronus? Prongs rode again last night. It took a moment for Harry to realize what Dumbledore had said. Last night, Sirius told me all about how they became Animagi, said Dumbledore, smiling. An extraordinary achievement, not least keeping it quiet from me. And then I remembered the most unusual form your Patronus took when it charged Mr. Malfoy down at your Quidditch match against Ravenclaw. You know, Harry, in a way, you did see your father last night. You found him inside yourself. And Dumbledore left the office, leaving Harry to his very confused thoughts. Amidst a turmoil of injustice, we should pay due attention to what isn't just emotional justice here in this last movement of the story, but an actual valid external justice too. Harry has gone through the fire. Harry has been opposed from the first page of this book by the specter of the past, by the specter of the grim, by prophecies of death. But in turning away from death, in the preservation of Peter Pettigrew, he has, as Dumbledore confirms here, embodied his father. And we don't know to what degree that moral choice carried weight in the restoration of James within Harry, that connection of one wizard with another across the gulf of death, across the generations here, father and son. But it seems as though it may have had some impact. Certainly, knowing that James would be proud of him, as has been confirmed to Harry several times over now by Sirius and by Lupin and now by Dumbledore too, knowing that his father would be proud of him certainly does seem to give Harry a great sense of comfort, a great sense of security, and of course, a greater connection with those people who are most important to him. Yeah. Yes, Angela says, so prongs did appear at the Quidditch match. Something resembling prongs appeared at the Quidditch match. It's unclear whether that was a true manifestation of Harry's Patronus or something that was, halfway between the silvery mist and the full-on, deal. I think it would, yes, as Grumbledore says, if only someone had mentioned what Patronus they saw at the match. That's what makes me think that it wasn't a full-on manifestation of the Patronus, but maybe something in between. Yeah, we don't get more detail of that. Yes. Is Harry Prongs Jr., says Tolkien Lover. That's how I'm going to refer to him from now on. That's it. Prongs Jr.? Yeah. That's excellent. Joseph says, do you think Dumbledore schedules these end-of-year chats in his Outlook calendar? Yes, he absolutely does, right? I think there's a question, actually, about the end-of-term. Let me see here if I scroll through. Yes, Joseph asked in the little chat, in the little questions box, what is the end-of-year staff party at Hogwarts like? Awkward small talk, hookups in the room of requirement after too much fire whiskey? I'm gonna go out and say no hookups. Those probably happen down in Hogsmeade, right? I don't think they happen here in the school. I think there would be too much gossip and speculation. It's unclear how many professors actually work here, and it's also unclear about the distinction between the professors and the kind of faculty and staff, right? Would Madame Pomfrey be invited to the end of year, professor party shindig? Would Filch be invited? Would Madame Hooch be invited? I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much about that, but I am damn sure of one thing, and that is that Dumbledore shows up late because he's just been having a conversation with Harry. Yes, absolutely. Okay, let's keep pushing on to the Owl Post, in fact. So we get a letter from Sirius basically saying, I'm safe, I'm fine, I'm hanging out with Buckbeak, we're having a grand old time. Buckbeak and me, we got a lot in common. Actually, it's pretty good. It's a good life. I also root around for worms in the dirt with my nose. So we get to talk about that and all kinds of other fun things. It's all going to be fine. Just a little beat of reassurance here. Again, not justice. Feels like justice because he's free. Not justice because his name wasn't cleared, you guys. His name wasn't cleared. The ministry here as inept as ever. Harry looked eagerly inside the envelope. There was another piece of parchment in there. He read it through quickly and felt suddenly as warm and contented as though he'd swallowed a bottle of hot butterbeer in one gulp. I, Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, hereby give him permission to visit Hogsmeade on weekends. That'll be good enough for Dumbledore, said Harry happily. He looked back at Sirius's letter. Hang on, there's a P.S. I thought your friend Ron might like to keep this owl, as it's my fault. He no longer has a rat. Restoration of justice? Well, restoration of justice absolutely within the juvenile frame of Hogwarts, right? If we're going to continue Harry Potter as a boarding school adventure series, then these are two major triumphs. Ron has a new familiar. He has a new pet. It's an owl. It's better than Scabbers in most ways, but also Harry has his Hogsmeade permission slip ready to go for next year. Minor, but significant nonetheless. And of course, it's not really about Hogsmeade. It's not really about getting to go on these field trips and buy candy and practical jokes for the rest of the semester. That's not what it's about, really. What it's about really is the one word there, godfather. Harry has family. Now he has someone in his corner who is going to back him up. And again, we know that this is the intent underlying this because of the final discussion that we get. We close out this book on a really weird note, you guys. Let's have our last slide of Prisoner of Azkaban here. What's that? He snarled, staring at the envelope Harry was still clutching in his hand. If it's another form for me to sign, you've got another... It's not, said Harry cheerfully. It's a letter from my godfather. Godfather, sputtered Uncle Vernon. You haven't got a godfather. Yes, I have, said Harry brightly. He was my mom and dad's best friend. He's a convicted murderer, but he's broken out of wizard prison and he's on the run. He likes to keep in touch with me, though. Keep up with my news, check if I'm happy. And grinning broadly at the look of horror on Uncle Vernon's face, Harry set off toward the station exit, Hedwig rattling along in front of him for what looked like a much better summer than the last. It's a happy ever after ending. You guys, after a tumultuous year at Hogwarts, Harry gets to go back to the Dursleys for the summer. But the rules are a little different now. Firstly, he has the Quidditch World Cup to look forward to. Hey, we'll probably talk about that a little bit in book 4, I would imagine. But also, he can cow his aunt and uncle and cousin with the threat of an escaped mass murderer who's also parenthetically a wizard and his godfather. Harry here is not embodying the rules of Hogwarts or the rules of the Wizarding World or, hey, the rules of standard civility. This is not a move that Harry would have made at the end of the second book or at the end of the first book, but it is absolutely a move that Harry will make at the end of the third book. Why? Well, 2 reasons. Harry has learned that you cannot put your trust in what ought to be, that the structures of authority, that the rules, the laws of your society may not actually protect you. Harry, our ethos in our power trio, the taker of action, has learned that actually the best solution to most problems is taking action. And so here he is taking action, deliberately frightening Vernon Dursley into behaving himself over the summer. Now, let's remember the circumstances under which Harry left Privet Drive, the inflation of one aunt. Harry broke the rules when he left Privet Drive in the first place and was not punished. Rather than being punished, he was rewarded with a little vacation, a little 2-week vacation in Diagon Alley, thanks to the Ministry of Magic. Now he's returning, but we are just reframing Vernon Dursley as the standard antagonist. This is the Dursley who we met at the very beginning of the book, before the sequence of events played out. Harry's traumatized by the inflation of his aunt because he believes he's going to get kicked out of Hogwarts, and also it feels as though there's some kind of guilt associated with it, right? He knows he shouldn't have done it. But in a book that is preoccupied with crime and punishment and the leveraging of justice and injustice, Harry has transcribed an arc here that has led him in an unexpected direction. What does the Harry at the end of the book think of the actions of Harry at the beginning of the book? Probably fine. Probably fine, actually. He did something that he ought not to have done, but it worked out okay. And thus we see that the Harry that we get at the end of Prisoner of Azkaban has undergone a transition. He has kind of moved through this liminal state. He is not readily cowed now. He has faced danger. Yes, of course, as he does every year. He has faced potential death. Yes, of course, as he does every year. But he has also had, he has undergone a process of maturing here. He has had the scales lifted from his eyes. He is not now as naive as he was. He doesn't believe that Vernon Dursley is going to, or even that Vernon Dursley has the right to suppress and oppress him through the summer vacation. He is no respecter now of the tyranny of Vernon Dursley. He has been changed. Yeah, exactly. Good. Snarky Potter, says Gildarts Winters, got that from James. Yeah, that line, this is, gosh, among the first times that we've ever had a line like this from Harry, right? He was my mom and dad's best friend. He's a convicted murderer, but he's broken out of wizard prison and he's on the run. He likes to keep in touch with me though, ellipsis. Keep up with my news, ellipsis. Check if I'm happy. Am I going to be happy, Uncle Vernon? Am I going to be happy this summer? Or is the worst prisoner ever to escape from Azkaban going to show up at our doorstep at number 4 Privet Drive? Oh, I did mention that I gave him the address, didn't I? Yeah, he knows where we are. He knows where we live, and he's keeping tabs on me, this very dangerous, convicted mass murderer. Yeah, it's a bold choice. It's a very bold choice, and it's not entirely moral, but it is ultimately pragmatic. And when I say it's not entirely moral, that is not to defend the Dursleys, right? The Dursleys, generally pretty awful, you guys. I'm firmly pro-Harry when it comes to the Harry-Dursley conflict here. But Harry is not obeying the rules. He's not obeying the law anymore. And again, not talking about the law of Hogwarts, the law of the Wizarding World, not the law of the Muggle world. I'm talking about he's not obeying the standard rules of civility and society. This is an outright threat. And that's unusual. That's a progression for Harry. So this is very much, again, a turning point. Yeah. Bryce says, do we get if Vernon is on 9 3/4, or if he stays on the Muggle side of the station? It would be hard to believe he would stay on platform 9 3/4 when he hates all things magical. I can only assume, yes. You can fudge the pros here a little bit. And yeah, he's on the Muggle side of the station. I'm sure for exactly the reasons that you call out. Yes, good. Okay. Harry makes Vernon an offer he can't refuse, says Gildarts Winters. Right. And yes, such a Slytherin tactic out of Harry here, says Shannon. Such a Slytherin tactic. Yes. All right. I have run I've run half an hour over. Good Lord, it's like the old days when I used to do 2-hour sessions. Let me share the slide here with you so we can talk about our plans for the future. The next session is going to take place this coming Friday. That is November 3rd at 9 p.m. Eastern. It is not going to be a typical session of Dear Mr. Potter, because what I am going to do is launch a crowdcast just like this one, where I can talk directly to you and you can hang out in the chat, but we are all simultaneously going to be watching Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Now, I cannot stream that movie to you, so you are going to have to come up with some imaginative 2-screen solution where you can have Prisoner of Azkaban, the movie, playing on your TV or on your laptop, and you can hang out in Crowdcast on your phone or your tablet, or maybe you have a 2-monitor setup, as I do here in the studio. It's going to be real easy for me, actually, you guys. I get the easy end of the thing this time, except it's going to be easy technically, but it's going to be difficult creatively, because what I'm going to be doing is basically giving you an extemporaneous 2-hour live commentary track, I suppose, for this movie. So you will, after the fact, be able to download what is, in effect, a commentary track and sync it up. So if you can't make it to the live showing, or if that is a technical hurdle that you can't clear, don't worry about it. The commentary track will be available after the fact. We'll talk all over